Hello anyone that's here. I'm just going to tap into the comments. Hi Jess. And now it's 10 o'clock, so I'm going to start with this first live broadcast from the Bouts Art School, which is being run by the Bowes Museum all through this summer. And today I'm Richard Bliss, and usually I'm a textile artist, so my big project is called Quest for the Perfect Shirt, and I make various textile things. But today I'm looking at my other big love, which is zines. And although those zines, some of you might have come across them, zines short for magazines. And I'm going to make a really simple one sheet zine with 8 pages, and then I'll show you a couple of other things as well. And all of these workshops are inspired by a painting which was bought by the Bowes Museum back in 2016, I think it was. But that painting is, this is St. Luke drawing the Virgin and Child. And it was painted in Derek Bout's workshop. And it was painted sometime between 1440 and 1475. And it might seem really odd to try and make a connection between a medieval painting and zines, which really had their origins in the sort of late 20th century and became really popular in the 1960s, 70s and 80s. But I think there are lots of connections, partly because this painting itself was quite a breakthrough painting, and Derek Bout's was trying out lots of new ideas in this painting, which we can then see later in different art forms that came through, particularly symbolism, which I'm going to talk about a little bit later on. And then I'm going to also make some connections through to really much more contemporary art, so the art of Frida Carlo and Louise Bourgeois, two artists that I'm, again, really interested in, particularly Louise Bourgeois' work. And the connections that there are between how their paintings and their work is being created and the kind of work that was being done in this medieval period. One of the things that I find kind of interesting is that quite often art historians keep all of the paintings and work in a bit of a bubble. So they don't necessarily sort of see the cultural context in which a painting was made or a piece of work was made. And what I'm really interested in is always cultural context. So why are artists making the work they're making? What are they being influenced by? Who else has been influenced by their work later? And that again is the connection with zines, because zines are all about expressing ourselves and finding ways of talking about things that sometimes don't appear in the mainstream. And that's why I think there are some really strong connections between this kind of painting and modern zines. When I look down and flick things over, I've got some really clever cue cards, so I don't sort of lose track of what I'm talking about. So I mentioned before the Symbolists, and what I wanted to do first was talk a little bit about who they were. So the Symbolists were late 19th century artists for the most part. They were still working into the early part of the 20th century. And they were really, they rejected this idea of realism. So realism had come into play. This is before photography was really well established. And realism was an attempt by artists to capture what they thought was going on in the world in front of them. And of course, we all see the world slightly differently, and we all see different things when we actually are just looking, and of course looking and seeing are slightly different things. So the Symbolists really rejected this idea of being able to capture what was real, and they were much more interested in imagination, they were interested in emotion, they were also really interested in mythology and biblical ideas, and that's where I think this connection with the Derek Bout's painting is really strong. Because if you look at this painting and then you look at this painting, which is by Paul Gauguin, I'll pull it back from the camera a little bit. This painting's by Paul Gauguin and it's called Vision of the Sermon, and it's regarded as being the first symbolist painting. And Gauguin was one of those artists who was really strongly interested in the idea of representing dreams and imagination and visions. And this painting is of a vision. So this group of women here are a group of Breton women, and they've just had a sermon about Jacob wrestling the angel, which is a strong biblical story. And in painting terms, the reason that I think it's interesting is that Gauguin has given us the real in this part of the painting. He's then got the bough of a tree running across the centre, and the imagined realm here, the vision that these women are collectively seeing in this part of the painting. And if you look at the Dirk Bout's painting, very similar things are going on. Here you have the imagined realm. This is the vast majority of the painting. But on this side, behind this brown wall, you can see the artist's studio. So Dirk Bout is giving us the opportunity, or his studio is giving us the opportunity to see the real world as we think it is here, so the world of the artist, and then very much the in this section, but divided off by, in this case, a wall, and in the Gauguin painting, a beam. And again, that's something that I'll be talking about later on. But I thought we would get on and look at how to make a really simple zine. Now, some of you who are zine makers will have seen this before, but please bear with me because there are also people here who probably haven't made a one-page zine before. So I'm just going to take the camera down a bit and you should be able to see my working down here. So what I've got is a pair of scissors, a pen, so that helps you see what's going on, and some plain pieces of paper, and we're just going to crack on and make a really simple one-page zine. So the first thing we need to do is just fold the paper in half from the bottom to the top so that we get a nice neat halfway fold. If you've had to run off and get materials, don't worry if you come back halfway through this, although you'd be a really quick runner if you'd gone away and come back again, because this film is going to be up online at the end of this live workshop. The team at Bose will actually put the film up live, so you'll be able to go back over and see how to make the zine. And there's also going to be a PDF of how to make a zine, so I've got the original document here. So this, you'll see something like this as a PDF which you'll be able to download, and that also explains how to make the one-page zine. But if you want to make it along with me, just get yourself a sheet of A4, and the first thing you want to do, as I say, is go halfway up, so just fold it lengthways. Then flip your paper and fold it up the other way. So now you'll see that we're into 4 sections. Okay, so now we're in 4 sections. So you can see here, hopefully you can see those folds. So there's a fold here and there's a fold across the middle here. And then the next thing you're going to do is take the bottom of the paper, so the bottom of the paper here, and you're going to fold it up to the middle line here. So you just fold up and it meets the middle line here. So you've got another fold in the centre. So bottom to middle, and then flip your paper round and do the same thing and take the bottom to the middle. And you will end up with what you can see is 8 panels. So you've got 8 panels there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. But of course, if you just leave it like this, it's not a very good zine. You're certainly not going to get 8 pages that you can fold, and that's when the magic comes in. So all these folds are here to help you. You just fold up from the bottom to the top. So take the bottom, fold it to the top. So now you've got the fold at the bottom here. This is the folded edge here. And I'm going to just mark it in. You wouldn't do this, but it's quite hard to see on camera. You're just going to cut this line here. So you don't cut all the way, you just cut to the halfway point. And you just clip up the middle. As I say, you wouldn't put the marks in because they'll show on your page at the end. So now your piece of paper should look like that. So you've got a cut up the middle. And this is where the trick comes in, because you're going to pick up your piece of paper and you're going to kind of form a cross. Sometimes this works first time, sometimes it doesn't, but you need to pull the two apart and you form a cross. So it should look like that, where you've got a gap in the middle there, and you've got your fold here. This is a folded section and a folded section here, and you form a cross. And when you've formed your cross, you can see that you're beginning to emerge into what is pretty much a 4-page zine. Now, if I was not doing this live on Instagram, I would probably neat up my folds a little bit, but you're going to fold it so that you take this edge here goes round like that, and this one here goes round like that, and you end up with a little zine that holds together. So you've got your front cover here, and then you've got your 1, 2, your lovely double page spread, which we'll talk about later on, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and your back cover. So that's the way to make your basic 1-page zine. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about zines now. So I'll bring the camera back up. We'll be going back down onto the table again in a bit. I've just seen you've got a lovely view of my ironing board behind me, which does prove that I am a textile artist, but my apologies, I perhaps should have taken that out of shot. So you've got your little 1-page zine, and all sorts of people make zines. I've been involved in making zines for a really long time. So I started on zines in the 1980s. So I didn't actually write for this zine, but this was one of my favourites in the 1980s. This came out in 1983. It was produced by the Outrage Collective. I've worked around LGBTQI rights for a long time. And this was a period when I was really involved in tackling things like Section 28 and campaigning for equality, all sorts of things I was involved in at the time. And of course, we couldn't get into the mainstream media. That was what I was talking about before, that mainstream media would really ignore what we were talking about, or they perhaps didn't represent us in the way that we wanted to be represented. So we made our own publications. We picked up on the idea that had started maybe 10, 15 years before, and we really started to make our own media. And a lot of the time we would either print them by hand, so we would be on old-fashioned printing machines. Some of you who are as old as me, if you're here, will remember things like the Roneo machines, where you would wind them and off would come the pages, or we would literally sit and hand write things sometimes, because we didn't have any access to the technology to reproduce things more rapidly. Of course, now we've got access to photocopiers and printers and all sorts of things that we didn't have then. But we were always producing magazines like this one. Sometimes this had a professionally produced glossy cover, so it went to a printer's. Others were much more handmade. And that tradition of the sort of the zine, the magazine, that is both handmade and has some elements of technology involved in it, still continues today. I wanted to show you something. I just love this little zine that I found. It's written by an artist called Jasmine Carlier, and I know it comes back to front for you, so it's a little bit frustrating, but it's called Hood Rat. And Jasmine Carlier, she's a multidisciplinary artist, and she describes herself as a multidisciplinary artist that uses music, film, digital collage, zines, painting and poetry to bring road culture to the forefront. And she talks about her life in London. And the reason that I'm kind of interested in Carlier, I've never met her, I've only seen her work online, Jasmine Carlier, is that she lives about maybe 10 miles from where I was born and brought up. And we went to school at schools that were only about 2 or 3 miles apart. And she's using zines to talk about road culture and young women's culture and young black women's culture, and how she sees that and how it's been commercialised. And at about her age, I was writing zines about what we then talked as lesbians and gay men. Now, of course, it's whole LGBTQI and queer culture, but at the time we talked about lesbian and gay culture. And I was writing little zines like this as well, perhaps not with the same boldness that Jasmine has, but it's a fantastic little zine. And I thought it'd be interesting if you wanted some ideas, because what Jasmine does is she uses all her skills. As I say, it's unfortunate that Instagram flips everything, but here you can see that Jasmine has put in examples of her own artwork and photography, so she's put that in her zine, but she's also got poetry, and she's got little political statements about what she thinks are important in relation to her own culture and road culture, and not letting road culture become too commercialised. And I thought that's full of kind of ideas that some of you might want to share. And also you can use your own zine in any way you want to. So obviously Jasmine's been quite traditional about having a traditional cover, and then she's put information about herself on the back cover, but you might want to do something different with it. Okay, so that's how to make your one-page zine, but I also wanted to talk about take us back to the reason that all of these live broadcasts are happening. I'll tell you about this again, but as I say, this is the first one. There will be others. The next artist who's going to be taking part in the live broadcast is Melanie Kyles, and Melanie's going to be looking at colour and composition and collage. You'll be able to find all that information on the Bose website as well, but this is just the first, and we're all linking our work to about the Bouts painting. So just to take you back there, this is the Dirk Bouts painting, and I can see, as I say, there are some really strong connections to the Symbolists, but I also think there are lots of connections to contemporary artists, or more contemporary artists I should say. And the first person I wanted to talk about was Frida Kahlo. Lots of you will know Frida Kahlo's work. She was an artist who, she actually was born in 1907, but she always said that she was born in 1910 because 1910 was the date of the Mexican Revolution, and she always described herself as having been born with the revolution. And her Mexican culture and her Marxist politics, and she might not have called them feminist politics, but that we would see them maybe in that way. Her feminist politics were really important to her art. But one of the things that I thought you might want to think about is the fact that Frida Kahlo always puts herself at the centre of her art. So she has this very strong sense of being the artist who's at the centre of the work. And again, this connects to the Dirk Bouts painting. So when we look at, this is an image of St. Luke here, who's doing the drawing. So there's already a connection between picking the subject matter of an artist who's actually making a drawing of a vision. So that's the first connection that we can say, that the artist is very much at the heart of this painting. But there's also maybe some evidence that this artist is actually based on Dirk Bouts. So it could be that Dirk Bouts has perhaps put himself into the painting, and that's something that Frida Kahlo does very consciously. She puts the image of herself as artist, so not necessarily her whole self but her artistic self, at the centre of each painting. But she also shares some of the things that are in the Bouts painting. So in this painting you can see that Dirk Bouts has created this imagined landscape at the back of the painting. And Frida Kahlo frequently placed herself in different landscapes. So in this painting is, let me get the name right. I'm just going to get to the right card. This is the Say What You See section. So, sorry, this is called The Wounded Deer. I couldn't quite remember what kind of deer it was, but this is The Wounded Deer. And you can see that Kahlo has used her own face as the face of the deer. she always placed herself in her own, or often placed herself in her own paintings. And in this painting, she's really exploring this idea of herself as a woman with a significant disability. She was in a terrible bus accident when she was a young woman, and she spent 2 years in hospital. And originally she'd been going to train as a doctor. She wasn't able to do that. And while she was recovering, she started to paint. And that was where all of her painting came from. But the disability that resulted from this bus accident affected her through her whole life. But she's placed herself in this imagined forest, so she's back in the imagined realm. And I wondered if that might be something that you could explore in your zine. So you could do something about your imagined self. You could do something that was thinking about maybe an aspect of yourself that you don't often put on show to other people. And you might imagine yourself into another world. We do this all the time when we play things like online games, and particularly if we're playing games where we're in groups, we often have an avatar of ourselves, so an online presence of ourselves. And it would be, I thought it'd be quite interesting to try and pull that digitized, imagined avatar self that we see. You know, we're often, even things like Instagram that we're on now, we think really hard about how are we looking on it. Often we'll take a selfie and we'll delete it because we don't like the way we look. So we're curating ourselves all the time. And of course, this is an idea that Frida Kahlo plays with an awful lot, is that she is constantly curating herself and using her self-image to make political statements. And I thought that might be a really nice idea for a little zine like this, to create to take your avatar self and to give yourself an imagined realm and put it into your magazine. And one of the things we'd really like you to do, by the way, is that if you do make zines, if you could take photographs of them, so take a few photos of the different pages, that would be great. And if you could send them to the Bose Museum, if you put them up onto your social media, if you use the hashtag, let me just get the right hashtag, it's hashtag Bouts Art School. If you use that hashtag, then obviously Bose Museum will be able to pick that up and maybe share your posts if they really like them. But also, if you can send them into the Bose Museum, you'll find all the details on the Bose website, and you can send in the photographs of your zines. The other person that I talked about at the beginning of the workshop was Louise Bourgeois. I got really interested in the idea of that, and I made this little A5 zine called Frida and Louise. Older ones might get that reference. And I looked at Frida Kahlo's work. So here is Frida, again in an imagined realm. These are quite famous paintings which she did, where she used all sorts of animals, and the animals were very much representing her as a woman who was in control of her space, but also who was interested in the kind of symbolism and mysticism that often is attached to animals. And I began to look at why I was interested in it. So this section is about Louise Bourgeois. And I did a little web drawing because I was interested in mammal. And like Frida Kahlo, Louise Bourgeois put herself into her work all the time. Often she used her own clothes in her work, which is kind of how I got interested in her principally, was that I saw a lot of her work which involved using the clothes that she slept in. And I'm interested in how people use clothes to represent themselves, so they're kind of putting their outward selves on show. But Louise Bourgeois also unsettles a lot of the ideas about motherhood. And of course, that connects back to the Dirk Bouts painting, because here we have one of the strongest images of motherhood that we have in particularly Judeo-Christian culture. Of course, it's interesting because Dirk Bouts has painted Mary as a European white woman, even though we know that she was from what we now think of as the Middle East. Lots of boundaries of countries have changed since then. I was kind of interested in what it might be like if you actually painted Mary as she really looked. So I did this little cutout of I took an image of a woman from a tile that was made in Iran at about the time that Derek Boutts was making his painting. So I took this tile and I cut out the image of the woman and I placed it where Mary was in the Derek Boutts painting in order to try and make a point about how although we think a lot of the time that painting is kind of neutral, and even in this imagined world, the cultural context of what we're doing always comes to the fore. So Derek Boutts wouldn't have been thinking about the fact that Mary was in fact probably a North African woman, or at least a Middle Eastern woman. He would have just seen her in the tradition of that white Western European art. So I wanted to play with that idea and introduce this idea of being a different kind of mother and a different kind of woman. And that's something that Louise Bourgeois does all the time. And this is where her giant spiders come in, which are called mammals. And her giant spiders really unsettle us about the idea of mother, because mother is supposed to be kind of calm and quiet and protective, and we know that's not true. Women are not like that all the time. And what she did was say that this mother is a provider, she's a protector, but she could also be a killer. She might actually create this web that is going to capture food for herself and for her hundreds of babies that spiders give birth to. So she was really playing with this idea of motherhood. And again, I thought that might be something that some of you might want to play with in your zine, to look at modern ideas of gender and sexuality and maybe of motherhood. There are all sorts of images around that you'll see. This week we've seen lots of images of Princess Beatrice's wedding, very traditional wedding. What does that tell us about what the royal family are trying to project? So I hope you've enjoyed the workshop. I've really enjoyed doing it. It's been great fun. I hope you've been able to follow everything. As I say, everything will be downloadable from the Bose Museum website at the end of this broadcast. There are a couple of things. Again, I just want to remind you that there'll be other live broadcasts. As I say, the next one is going to be by Melanie Kiles, and she's looking at colour and composition and collage. The other thing is that there is going to be an opportunity to evaluate what we're doing. Evaluation is always really important to all of us who want to improve what we do. Telling us how we've done is great. And if you fill in the evaluation form, there are 5, not 10, 5 creativity packs that can be given away to the first 5 people who fill out an evaluation form. And that will be available on the Bose website later today once this video has been uploaded. So thank you all very much for taking part. I'm really sorry that I wasn't able to respond to your comments as I was going through. I'm not a technology genius, and I couldn't get everything commented on. But I've been told that the team at the Bose Museum will pick anything up that I might have needed to respond to. And also, I should have said that I was hoping to tell you that in my comments section that this is the Zine Making magazine, and I wasn't able to get that into the columns for some reason. But thank you all for watching. This is the end of the live part of the broadcast, and I'm just going to check that I've done everything. Yes, everything up on the website. I'm going to finish the live broadcast and then I'm going to upload it to the right place in Instagram. Goodbye for now. Bye. I'm going.